how can we make our characters more dimensional? Not wooden, not flat, not one-dimensional, but multi-dimensional, like the nuances of humans we know. I think a really easy way to do this is to have a scene of that character, your protagonist, I assume, in a situation where they feel as though that person has power over them, contrasted with a scene where they feel like they have the power over that person. And the reason why is not because I'm obsessed with power struggles, but because this naturally brings out different aspects of a character. Because a scene with them and their boss, or a scene with them getting pulled over by a cop, is different than a scene in which they are maybe a teacher, or maybe they are a therapist. When they're the role of authority, what do they do with that power? And when they're the one that's a little bit has to respond to power, how do they handle that? All of those kinds of hierarchies exist in our life, and sometimes you may not look at it as everything is a power exchange. I mean, certainly the woke left and the SJW side is obsessed and preoccupied with looking for power struggles in every interaction. But the reason I bring this up is that I just think it's a really easy way to bring out different sides of a character, and bringing out different sides is what makes them dimensional. And again, it's not even about whether it's an objective power structure or power dynamic. It's just if that character perceives that person as having more power, or perceives them as having less power. I mean, for instance, a kid is sometimes people make the kid the power of their life. Like, they kind of feel like they want to impress a kid, and that's a certain dynamic. And then there's another dynamic when an adult doesn't have any need to impress a kid, but almost looks down at them. Like, whether you're looking down or looking up at somebody, it's revealing something about you, and it brings out those aspects of your personality. And a good example of this that I think of on the top of my head from talking is in Bridesmaids. The main character, played by Kristen Wiig, Annie, she works at a jewelry store, and her boss is associated with her mother. So she got the job because her mother knew this man. And so at the jewelry store, when Kristen Wiig is showing kind of this cynicism toward people buying engagement rings, this boss then comes and confronts her and tells her, you need to show me your love is eternal face. And then she has to do it, So there's this there's this humor in how this boss, she has to cater to, she has to do this in order to keep her job. She has to show the love is eternal face. She can't be cynical about people buying engagement rings, because she's a salesperson trying to convince them to buy them, right? And so the comedy of that is we see that one aspect of her when she is basically, has more power than her. So she has to go along with that act, that way of being it, because she needs to keep her job. And then another incident at that jewelry store is when a 13-year-old girl comes in and is going to buy a friendship necklace for her friend. And then in that situation, when Kristen Wiig argues with her, Kristen Wiig interprets that she has more power than this 13-year-old and is very sassy. And it's a funny exchange because we get to see that other side of her. Like, we saw a side when she had to basically cater to someone, and then we see a side of her when she is kind of argumentative with a 13-year-old, which is its own kind of immaturity and petulance that's fun to watch. And not only that, but we also have throughout this movie, we have Kristen Wiig being pulled over by a cop for her broken tail light. And so we have we get to see her with a lot of different people. And while she's always, like, there's always kind of that zany quality to her that's a little bit zany and irreverent, we see, like, when she's pushed into a corner where she has to act a certain way versus when she can really act kind of her crazy self. We get to see different sides of her in that nuance of like, she's got some consistency, but it's the inconsistencies that bring out the nuance and dimension to her, and it's really fun. And another thing that is a great way to bring out immediate dimension besides all of these kind of who has power over what, is when somebody runs into an ex and they care about what they look like. You know, if they run into an ex and maybe they're looking their worst, or if they run into their ex and they have somebody with them, there's an immediate power kind of how you're going to act in that situation. So it's not just about, you know, it's not just about this kind of hierarchy in the boss, teacher, parent type of way. I mean it too in terms of, in any relationship, there's always kind of the ebb and flow of power. And so like if you run into an ex and you have somebody, a new person with you, and you run into them, that's a different feeling. That's going to bring out different sides of your character. There's going to be kind of a smug confidence and petulance and childishness. And then if you run into them when you're vulnerable, when you maybe, you know, aren't looking your best and you're maybe even are showing the pain of the breakup, that's a different dynamic. You feel more powerless in that. And of course, like you might argue, well, sometimes a state of powerlessness and pitifulness actually brings about power because that person feels sorry for you, and you know, there's all that. And yeah, you know, so it's not so much, I guess, a focus on what power means, but a focus on, you know, these different scenes bring out different aspects of our characters. When we're interviewing or we're on a first date, we're different than when we're seeing somebody that we've known 10 years ago. And so having that, all of those kinds of scenes and experiences, and having your character be uncomfortable in all of these different ways, give us a chance to really kind of experience her in more than just, if your story just has this main protagonist interacting with the same person, and it's just, they're always kind of the same level of banter or whatever it may be, then it just tends to get flat because it's just always these two people interacting. Like, they've got to have that ebb and flow. Like, we've got to have that mix to see, oh, this is how she acts when another factor is in the story, or this is how she acts, even if the ebb and flow of that dynamic changes because people have this kind of mercurial exchange where suddenly, like at one minute she's interacting with somebody that she thinks hates her, and the next he confesses his love, and then the next they're, you know, at it. Like, if the emotional ebb and flow is changing, of course that's going to bring out dimension. But what really brings out dimension is allowing your character to be in situations that, you know, still apply with the plot, but that bring out different aspects of them. And that typically what helps to make this more concrete is to think of it as, put her in a situation that this person has more power or less power as she perceives it. And so I hope this was helpful. I find it really helpful, and I haven't seen somebody talk about how this can really help when you're drafting a character and you don't want them to be flat or wooden or one-dimensional.